The morning sun on Verdenia IV was soft and golden, not like the harsh white light of Earth. It came through the biodome glass and touched everything. Gently, the rows of alien crops, the small houses with their red roofs, the playground where children screamed and laughed and chased each other through the warm air. Captain Aller Voss stood at the window of the orbital relay station high above the planet and watched the colony through the long-range cameras. She zoomed in on the playground. There they were, her twin daughters Mira and Sira, 7 years old, running barefoot on the soft blue grass. Mira was chasing a small flying creature that looked like a butterfly made of light. Sir was sitting in the dirt building something with stones and sticks. Ara smiled. It was a rare thing. That smile. She was a war veteran. She had fought in the border conflicts near Proxima and had the scars to prove it. But here, watching her girls play on this peaceful little world, the scars did not matter. Vania 4 was a small colony. About 4,000 people lived there. Farmers, scientists, teachers, engineers. It was far from the busy core worlds of the Terran Union. People came here because they wanted quiet lives. They wanted to grow things. They wanted their children to play under open skies. Director Hala Mubari ran the Verdania Learning Center, which was a fancy name for the colony school and daycare. She was a tall woman with kind eyes and a voice that could calm any crying child. 300 children, from babies to teenagers, passed through her doors every day. She knew every single one of them by name. She knew their favorite foods. She knew their fears. She loved them like they were her own. That morning Hala was organizing a nature walk for the younger children. They would go to the edge of the biodome and look at the strange plants that grew in the wild forests. Beyond, the children were excited. Little Tomas, who was 5, kept asking if they would see the big purple flowers that smelled like chocolate. Hala promised him they would. Nobody on Verdania was thinking about war. Nobody was thinking about aliens or weapons or politics. The galaxy was a big place with hundreds of species and thousands of disputes, but none of that touched this quiet corner of space until the ships came. They appeared on the colony's sensors at exactly 11:47 local time. 12 vessels, sleek and dark-shaped like the curved shells of insects. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel and took position in orbit around Verdania 4 without asking permission, without sending a greeting. All saw them first. From the relay station, her smile disappeared. She recognized the ship, designed from intelligence briefings. Velari, an insectoid species governed by a shared hive mind called the Nexian. They were known to be territorial and aggressive, but they had never had direct conflict with humanity. Communication came through. The Valari spoke in a buzzing, layered voice. Thousands of individual minds speaking as one. They claimed that Verdania 4 sat within their ancient spawning territory. They cited an old galactic charter that nobody had read in 200 years. They demanded that all humans leave the planet within 31 hours, one full rotation of Verdania. Ara immediately contacted Terran Command and the diplomatic corps. Ambassador Kalen Dice, humanity's representative to the galactic concord of aligned species, was pulled out of a trade meeting. He was a patient man, careful with words, the kind of diplomat who believed every problem could be solved with a conversation. He opened a channel with The Valerian began talking, down on the surface. The colony administrator announced a voluntary evacuation. There was no panic, not yet. People started packing. Transport shuttles were prepared, but there were only a few of them, and they were slow cargo ships, not built for speed. Getting 4,000 people off the planet in 31 hours would be very difficult. Director Mubari canceled the nature walk. She gathered all the children in the learning center's main hall, a big bright room with painted walls and soft floors. She told them they were going on a surprise trip, an adventure. The younger ones cheered. The older ones looked at her face and knew something was wrong. 22 hours passed. Ambassador Dice was still negotiating. He asked for more time. Vithari refused. He asked for safe passage guarantees. The Valari gave vague answers. He kept talking because talking was all he could do. The first transport shuttle lifted off with 600 people, mostly elderly and families with infants. The second shuttle was loading. The rector Mubari had her children lined up and ready. Then the sky turned white. The Valari did not fire missiles or lasers. They fired something worse, a neural suppression pulse. It was a bioweapon designed to shut down the nervous systems of enemy populations so they could be captured without a fight. It was calibrated for Valari biology. It had never been used on humans before. On adults the effect was bad but survivable. People collapsed with splitting headaches. Some vomited, some lost consciousness for a few minutes. They got back up confused and angry, but alive. On children, the effect was a nightmare. Human children's brains are still growing. Their neural pathways are forming, branching, connecting in ways that adult brains do not. The suppression pulse hit those developing pathways like a hammer hitting wet clay. Children began to scream. Then they began to seize, their small bodies shaking violently on the floor of the learning center. Blood ran from noses and ears. Eyes rolled back into heads. Director Mubari crawled across the floor, her own head splitting with pain, grabbing children, holding them, screaming for help into a communicator that no one was answering. She held little Tomas as his body went rigid and then limp. She checked his pulse. It was there, barely. Across the colony it was the same. Every child under 16 was hit. 197 children suffered severe brain damage in the first 10 minutes. Within the hour, 14 of them were dead. Up on the relay station, Captain Aller Voss watched the medical feed streaming in. From the surface, she saw the numbers. She saw the small bodies on stretchers. She saw the brain scans, dark patches spreading across images of tiny skulls. Then she saw her daughter's names on the critical list. Murau's age 7. Seizures, brain hemorrhage, coma. Saravio's age 7, seizures, neural pathway collapse, coma. Aura did not scream. She did not cry. Something inside her went very quiet and very cold, like a star collapsing into itself. Before it explodes, she sat down at her communication terminal. She typed a message to Terran Military Command. Single line on an encrypted channel that would reach every admiral, every general, every commander in the Terran Navy within seconds. They heard her. Children, all of them, send everything. She pressed send. Then she sat in the silence of the relay station, staring at the feet of her daughters, lying motionless in medical pods, and waited for the galaxy to learn what happens when you harm what humans love most. The news hit Earth like a shock wave. It traveled through the quantum link communication network at faster than light speed, reaching every human colony, every space station, every ship, every home with a screen or a speaker. The footage was raw and unedited. Someone in the Verdania Medical Center had started recording and never stopped. The galaxy saw what humans saw that night, small bodies on metal tables, doctors working with shaking hands. Little girl, maybe 4 years old, her eyes open but seeing nothing, blood dried on her face. A boy no older than 6, hooked to a machine that breathed for him because his brain had forgotten how. A mother on her knees beside a medical pod, pressing her forehead against the glass, whispering to a child who could not hear her. And then they number 14 dead, 197 with severe brain damage, all of them children on Earth. People stopped what they were doing, factories went quiet, traffic stopped, restaurants emptied in cities across the planet. Billions of humans watched the same footage and felt the same thing, a cold, deep, terrible anger that started in the chest and spread outward until it filled every part of the body. There were no riots, there were no protests, there was something much worse. There was silence in the halls of the Galactic Concord, the great diplomatic body where hundreds of alien species gathered to argue and trade and form alliances. The human delegations changed overnight. The Concord was used to humans being loud. Humans argued about everything. They filed complaints, they made jokes, they slapped each other on the back and laughed too hard at their own stories. The aliens found them annoying, charming, unpredictable. Now the human seats were quiet. The human diplomats sat still, their faces blank, their eyes flat. They did not argue, they did not file complaints. They did not speak to anyone, they just sat there like stones. The other species noticed. Some were confused, some were uncomfortable, a few were afraid, though they could not explain why. Ambassador Kalen Dice requested the floor. He was known in the Concord as a reasonable man, the human you could talk to, the one who always preferred words over weapons. He stood at the central podium, and for a long moment he said nothing. He just looked out at the hundreds of alien faces watching him. Then he spoke. His voice was calm and steady, and that made it worse. He presented the medical data, he showed the brain scans, he showed the weapon analysis, how the Vulari neural suppression pulse was designed for their own species, how it was untested on humans, how the Vulari had fired it knowing there were children on the surface and not caring what would happen to them. He did not raise his voice, he did not threaten. When he finished, he said only this: humanity will handle this matter internally. We respectfully ask that the Concord not interfere. Then he sat down. The chamber erupted. Some species demanded explanations. Others called for an investigation. The Vulari representative, a tall insect drone speaking for the Nexian, insisted that the weapon had been a standard pacification tool and that the damage to children was an unintended side effect. Regrettable, it called it. In the back of the chamber, the Drowath delegation watched everything with ancient golden eyes. The Daleth were one of the oldest species in the galaxy, reptilian, slow-moving, wise in ways that younger species could not understand. Their elder ambassador, a massive creature named Servon, had lived for over 800 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had seen wars that burned entire star systems. A younger alien diplomat leaned over to him and whispered, "Why are the humans being so quiet? Are they afraid?" Sorvan looked at the young diplomat with an expression that might have been pity. "No," he said, "they are not afraid. When humans go quiet, it means they have stopped thinking about whether to destroy you. They are now thinking about how, across human space, something unprecedented was happening." Fleet Admiral Constantine Ruse, commander of the Terran 7th Expeditionary Fleet, had received his orders from the United Terran Council. Not a limited strike, not a defensive deployment. The Council had activated the total species-level military response protocol, a document written into humanity's founding charter 200 years ago. For exactly this kind of situation, it had never been used. Most people thought it was symbolic. It was not symbolic. Every Terran Navy fleet received mobilization orders. The 7th, the 3rd, the 12th, the reserve fleets, the colonial defense forces, private military companies received government contracts within hours. Retired soldiers received recall notices. Civilian cargo ships were commandeered and refitted with weapon systems. Admiral Reyes stood in the command center of his flagship, the TNS Retribution, and watched the fleet status board light up like a Christmas tree. Ships were reporting in from every corner of human space. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, battleships, dreadnoughts that had been sitting in orbital dry docks for decades, kept in reserve for a war that everyone hoped would never come. This was that war. Rey was not an emotional man. He was 63 years old, built like a block of iron, and had a face that looked like it had been carved from stone by someone who did not believe in smiling. He had commanded fleets in 3 separate conflicts. He had never lost, but this was different. This was not about territory or resources or politics. He looked at the medical report on his desk, page after page of children's names, ages, injuries, status. He closed the file and set it aside. "How many ships do we have?" he asked his chief of staff. "As of this hour, 4,216. Combat-ready vessels, sir. More are coming." Reyes nodded. It was enough. On the other side of the galaxy, the Valari Nexion detected the fleet buildup through its spy networks and long-range sensors. The collective hive mind processed the information and found it confusing. They had expected a response, perhaps a retaliatory strike on one of their border outposts. That was how galactic conflicts worked. Proportional responses, measured escalation. The Nexion sent a message to the conquered. Why are they humans mobilizing their entire military force? We only attacked one colony. Message was read aloud in the conquered chamber. Several species murmured. The Drought Elder Sorvan let out a long, slow breath that might have been a sigh, or might have been a growl. A junior conquered official, trying to be helpful, forwarded the question to the human delegation with a note asking for clarification. Ambassador Dice read it, set it down, and did not respond. Later that night, the Daleth ambassador sent a private message to the Valari Nexion. It contained no diplomatic language, no formal greeting, no polite structure. It said only this: you did not attack a colony, you attacked their children. There is no proportional response for that. Prepare yourselves. Back on Verdinia, in the dim light of the medical center, Director Hallam Mubari sat Between two rows of medical pods, 183 children lay in artificial comas, their small chests rising and falling. With the rhythm of machines, the room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors. Hala held the hand of a small boy named Tamas. His fingers were tiny. In hers, his face was peaceful, as if he were just sleeping, as if he might wake up at any moment and ask about the purple flowers that smelled like chocolate. She did not know about the fleets. She did not know about the speeches. She did not know that the largest military force in human history was being assembled because of what had happened in this room. She only knew that the children were hurt and that somewhere out in the dark between the stars something terrible was coming for the ones who had done this. She could feel it the way animals feel a storm before it arrives, a pressure in the air, a charge in the silence, a sense that the universe itself was holding its breath. And far away in the cold depths of space, 4,000 warships turned their engines toward Velari space and began to move. The Velari Border Defense Network detected the human fleet 3 hours before it arrived. Long-range sensors painted the picture in cold numbers: 4,200 warships in tight formation, moving at maximum faster than light speed, heading straight for the heart of Velari territory. The Nexian processed the data across its billion connected minds. It had fought wars before. The Velari were not a weak species. They were conquerors, hive warriors who had crushed 6 small civilizations in the past 1,000 years. Their fleet numbered 1,800 warships, each one crewed by soldiers who felt no fear, no doubt, no hesitation, because the hive mind thought for them, and the hive mind was never afraid. The Nexian deployed its forces along the border, a wall of dark, insected ships backed by orbital defense platforms bristling with weapons. It was a strong defense against any normal enemy. It would have been enough. The human fleet dropped out of faster than light travel at the Velari border at exactly 60 Terran Standard Time. Admiral Constantine Roos stood on the bridge of the TNS Retribution and looked at the tactical display. The Vithari defense line stretched across the screen like a dark ribbon. Ray is open to broadcast on all frequencies. His voice went out in every known galactic language, reaching not just the Velari, but every listening post, every spy satellite, every alien ship in the sector. The galaxy was watching, and he wanted the galaxy to hear. To the Velari Nexian, he said. His voice was flat and calm, like a man reading a weather report. You used weapons of war on human children. You were given time to allow evacuation, and you chose violence. Instead, 14 children are dead. 197 more may never wake up. This is not a negotiation. This is not a warning. This is a consequence. He closed the channel and looked at his tactical officer. Begin. The battle of the Velari border lasted 11 hours. In the history books that would be written later, it would be described as many things: a massacre, a reckoning, a lesson. But those who were there, who saw it with their own eyes, used a simpler word. They called it a horror. The human fleet hit the Velari line like a fist hitting glass. The first wave was the heavy dreadnoughts, massive ships that had been built for exactly this kind of fight. They punched through the center of the Velari formation, their weapons firing in coordinated patterns that tore holes in the enemy line. Behind them came the cruisers and destroyers pouring through. The gaps hitting the Velari ships from the sides and from behind. The Velari fought hard. They were warriors, and the Nexian directed their movements with perfect coordination. Their ships were fast and their weapons were powerful. They destroyed hundreds of human vessels in the first hours. Debris filled the space between the fleets, twisted metal, frozen bodies, the burning remains of ships from both sides. But the humans did not stop. They did not slow down. They did not retreat. When a human destroyer lost its engines, it fired its remaining weapons until its ammunition was gone, and then it turned its broken hull toward the nearest Velari carrier and rammed it at full speed. When a human fighter squadron ran out of missiles, the pilots flew their ships directly into the hangar bays of Velari warships and detonated their reactors. When a human cruiser was surrounded and cut off, its crew fought with manual weapon systems, firing by hand after their targeting computers were destroyed until the ship came apart. Around them it was not madness. That was what the watching galaxy could not understand. The humans were not out of control. They were perfectly controlled. Every suicide run was calculated. Every ram was aimed. Every sacrifice was chosen with cold, clear precision. This was fury, not wild and hot, but cold and sharp like a blade made of ice. Velari Nexian had never encountered anything like it. The hive mind processed the battle data and searched its collective memory for a comparison. It found none. Every species the Velari had ever fought had a breaking point, moment where the cost became too high, and they pulled back. The humans did not have that point, or if they did, it was somewhere far beyond anything the Nexian could calculate. By the 5th hour, the Valfari defense line was broken. By the 8th hour, their fleet was in full retreat. By the 11th hour, it was over. The Velari had lost 1,400 ships. The remains of their navy scattered into deep space, running for the safety of their core systems. The human fleet had lost 900 ships and over 60,000 sailors. Admiral Reyes read the casualty report and set it aside. He did not pause. He did not mourn. There would be time for mourning later. Now there was work to do. The fleet pushed forward into Velari territory. What followed over the next 3 weeks was not a war. It was a dismantling. Reyes moved through Velari space like a surgeon cutting away diseased tissue. He did not attack cities. He did not bomb civilian populations. He was precise and methodical, and that made it more terrifying, not less. He destroyed every military shipyard, every weapons factory, every ammunition depot, every communication array that the Velari military used. He found there research stations where the neural suppression weapons were developed, and he turned those stations into clouds of dust. He found their training facilities and their command centers and their supply lines, and he broke every single one of them. The Valfari tried to fight back. They organized counterattacks with whatever ships they had left. The Nexian threw everything it could at the human fleet. Armed civilian vessels, ancient warships pulled out of museums, hastily built defense platforms. None of it was enough. The humans swept them aside like a hand brushing away insects. In the Galactic Concord, emergency sessions ran day and night. Alien diplomats argued and shouted and demanded action. Some called for sanctions against humanity. Some called for a peacekeeping force to stopped the advance, some simply sat in their seats and stared at the tactical feeds with wide, frightened eyes. The Daleth elder soon attended every session, but said nothing. He sat in his chair, like a mountain of gray scales, watching the other species panic with an expression that was impossible to read. Finally, a young diplomat from the Curacy species, small furry known for their emotional sensitivity, stood up and addressed the chamber. "This is genocide," she cried. "The humans are destroying an entire civilization. We must stop them." Soren opened his eyes. The chamber fell quiet. When a Daleth elder spoke, everyone listened, because the Daleth had been old when most of these species were still learning to use fire. "They are not committing genocide," Sauron said, his voice deep and slow. "They have not killed a single Vori civilian. They are destroying the ability to make war. There is a difference." He paused. "And I will remind this chamber of something. We told you when the reports came from Verdenia. We told all of you what would happen. Several of you laughed. The Gessi delegation, if I remember correctly, said that humanity was too divided to mount a serious response." He looked at the young Curacy diplomat. "Are they laughing now?" The diplomat said. "Nothing." Soren settled back into his chair. "You do not touch their young," he said quietly. "This has always been the rule." The Vithari chose to ignore it. "What comes now is not genocide, it is education." Deep in Vari space, a single drone soldier stood in the ruins of a destroyed military base. It was a unit of the Nexian, one mind among billions. But the connection to the hive was weak. Here, the communication arrays were gone. The great web of shared consciousness was full of holes and static. For the first time in its existence, the drone soldier had to think alone, and alone, standing in the ashes of everything its species have built. It thought a very simple thought: we should not have hurt their children. Above the ruined base, human ships moved through the dark sky like predators, heading deeper into Vulari space, heading toward the home world, and they did not stop. The Terran armada arrived at Veloris Prime on a Tuesday. It was not a battle. There was nothing left to fight with. The Valeri home world had once been protected by 300 orbital defense platforms, a permanent fleet of 400 warships, and a planetary shield generator that was considered one of the finest pieces of military engineering in the galaxy. Admiral Reyes had destroyed all of it in the 3 weeks it took his fleet to cross Vari space. By the time the human ships took position in orbit around the home world, the only thing between them and the surface was empty space and silence. 4 billion Velari lived on that planet. Workers, builders, thinkers, breeders. The vast majority of them had never held a weapon, had never made a decision about war, had never even been aware of the colony called Verdania until the humans came knocking at their door with fire in their hands. Reyes looked at the planet on his viewscreen. It was a brown and green world covered in massive hive structures that rose from the surface like mountains. Millions of lights flickered across the dark side. Cities, homes, lives. He could destroy it. He had the firepower. One command in Vithuris Prime would become a dead rock. His officers knew it. The Valeri knew it. The entire galaxy, watching through long-range sensors and spy satellites, knew it. He did not give that command. Instead, he opened the broadcast again on all frequencies, again in every language. again for the whole galaxy to hear. What he said next will be studied in diplomatic meetings and military schools for centuries. To the Valari Nexium, your military is destroyed, your weapons are gone, your ability to wage war no longer exists, you are defenseless and you are alive, remember both of those things. Then he read the terms. The Valari would surrender all remaining military assets permanently. They would never rebuild a military force without human approval. Every note of the Nexium that participated in the decision to fire on Verdenia would be identified and handed over to Terran authorities. The Valari would fund for as long as it took the complete medical care and rehabilitation of every child injured in the attack. They would dismantle their entire neural suppression weapons program under human supervision. Every piece of research, every prototype, every blueprint would be destroyed, and then came the final term, the one that made the galaxy hold its breath. If any human child currently in medical care on Verdania dies from injuries caused by your weapon from this day forward, Ray said, one Velthari hive world will be sterilized. For each death, the conquered chamber erupted. Alien diplomats screamed protest. Some called it barbaric, some called it a war crime. The Cure's delegation walked out. 3 other species joined them. Ambassador Kalen Dice, who had been silent for weeks, stood up. He looked tired. The man who once believed that every problem could be solved with a conversation looked like he had aged 10 years, but his voice was steady when he spoke. I understand the objections, he said. I help write these terms and I understand how they look from the outside, so let me give you some context. He paused. When I was given this assignment, I sat in a room with Admiral Reyes and his staff. I asked the Admiral what terms he wanted to offer the Velari. His original terms were 1 sentence long. Drick looked around the chamber. I will not repeat that sentence, but I will tell you that what you just heard, the terms that many of you are calling barbaric, those are the gentle version. Those are what mercy looks like when you have hurt the children of a species that would burn the galaxy to keep its young safe. Chamber was quiet. Humanity did not start this. Dice continued. We built farm on a quiet planet. We sent our children to school. We were growing food and studying flowers, and the Velari looked at our children and decided they were acceptable losses in a land dispute. His voice hardened just slightly. 14 families are planning funerals for children who were playing in a garden 3 weeks ago. 183 more families are sitting beside medical pods, praying to whatever gods they believe in, hoping their sons and daughters will open their eyes again. Those are the facts, and now the Velari will live with the consequences of what they did. He sat down. Nobody spoke. Valari Nexium, fractured and desperate, sent a message to the conquered, begging for intervention. They asked for a peacekeeping force. They asked for protection. They asked for anything. The conquered voted. The motion to intervene on behalf of the Velari failed by a wide margin, not because the other species agreed with humanity. Many of them were horrified by the terms. The motion failed because they were afraid. They had watched humanity dismantle galactic power in 3 weeks. They had seen what 4,000 ships could do when driven by something deeper than strategy. No one wanted to find out what those ships would do if someone got in their way. The Daleth voted against intervention. When asked why, Esvon said simply, because it would not work and because they earned this, on Verdania far from the politics and the speeches, something small and quiet was happening. The medical center had been transformed. Humanity had poured resources into the colony, the best doctors, the most advanced equipment, experimental treatments that had never been tried before, neural regeneration therapy, assisted brain mapping, stem cell treatments designed specifically for developing brains, the amount of money and technology focused on those 183 children was more than most alien species spent on their entire health care systems. Slowly, carefully, children began to wake up, not all of them, not quickly. Some would need months or years of therapy, some would never fully recover. The damage was real and deep, and no amount of technology could undo all of it, but some of them opened their eyes. Captain Aravas had not left her daughter's side in 3 weeks. She had barely eaten, she had barely slept. She sat between their 2 medical pods, holding one small hand in each of hers, and she talked to them. She told them stories. She described the blue grass and the light butterflies and the purple flowers that smelled like chocolate. She told him about the farm and the school and the playground. She told them everything was going to be okay, even when she did not believe it. On the 23rd day, Sarah opened her eyes. She blinked. She looked around the room with confusion, taking in the machines and the lights and the tubes. Then she saw her mother's face. Mama, she whispered. Ara could not speak. She pressed her lips together and squeezed her daughter's hand. Mama is the loud noise gone. Alvas, the war veteran, the officer who had calmly calculated targeting solutions for every Velari installation in 3 sectors. The woman who had sent the message that launched the largest military campaign in human history broke. She put her head down on the edge of the pod and cried, not quiet tears, deep shaking sobs that came from somewhere so far inside her that she did not know it existed. 3 weeks of silence and ice and control crumbled in an instant, and she held her daughter's hand and wept. 2 days later, the Velari accepted all terms. Nexion, that vast interconnected mind, that it governed billions, could not hold itself together under the way of total defeat. The shared consciousness began to fragment. Hive clusters that had been connected for thousands of years split apart, unable to agree, unable to process what had happened. The Vari did not just lose a war, they lost themselves. In the span of 1 month, a galactic power ceased to exist, not because it was destroyed, but because it could not survive the knowledge of what it had done and what it had cost. And across the galaxy, in every diplomatic hall, in every military academy, every government chamber, a new understanding settled into place like dust after an explosion. It was simple, it was clear, and it would never be forgotten. Do not touch their children. 5 years passed. The galaxy moved on the way galaxies do. Trade routes reopened. New alliances formed. Old grudges faded into background noise, but some things once learned are never forgotten. Vania 4 was not the same quiet little colony it had been before. It had grown. New settlers arrived every month. Families who wanted to be part of the place that had changed everything. The population had doubled to 8,000. New biodomes stretched across the landscape filled with crops and gardens. And parks, the old cargo shuttles have been replaced with modern transports, and a full Terran battle group sat in permanent orbit above the planet, its weapons pointed at the stars like a dare. But the most important change was the Learning Center. Director Hallam Mubari had overseen its rebuilding herself. The new center was 3 times the size of the old one. It had the best classrooms, the best laboratories, the best play areas that human engineering could design. The walls were painted with murals, not by artists but by the children themselves, bright and wild and full of the kind of imagination that only young minds can produce. In front of the center, where the old playground had been, there was now a garden. It was called the Memory Garden. 14 stone benches sat in a circle around a small fountain, and on each bench was carved a name. 14 names, 14 children who would never grow up, never run through the blue grass again, never ask about flowers that smelled like chocolate. Little Tomas was not one of the 14. He had survived. He was 10 years old now, and he walked with a slight limp because the neural damage had affected his left leg. He did not remember the attack. Doctor said that was probably a mercy. He still loved the purple flowers, and every morning before school he stopped at the memory garden and touched the bench that bore the name of his best friend, a girl named Lena, who had not been so lucky. Captain Voss was no longer a captain. She had been promoted twice and now held the rank of Commodore, commanding the entire Verdinia Defense Force. It was a prestigious position, but she had not taken it for the prestige. She had taken it because it meant her daughters would grow up on the safest human colony in the galaxy, and she would be the one making sure of that. Mira and Sarah were 12 now. They were healthy. The neural regeneration therapy had worked slowly, painfully, with setbacks and scares, but it had worked. Mira was loud and athletic and wanted to be a pilot. Sarah was quiet and bookish and wanted to be a biologist. Neither of them fully understood what had happened. When they were 7, they knew they had been sick. They knew there had been a war. They did not know that their mother's message had started it. Ara watched them from the window of her office as they walked to school, arguing about something, probably whose turn it was to feed the family's pet, a small Verdanian creature that looked like a cat made of moss. She smiled. The scars were still there inside and out, but the smile came easier now. Across the galaxy, the Valari were a shadow. The great Nexium was gone. The unified hive mind that had governed billions had shattered into hundreds of smaller clusters, each one isolated, confused, struggling to survive without the vast collective intelligence that had guided them for thousands of years. Some clusters had turned inward, cutting off contact with the galaxy entirely. Others had tried to rebuild, forming small alliances with neighboring species, trading labor for protection, and some, a surprising number, had come to human space. This was the part that the galaxy could not understand. Humanity had destroyed the Valari as a power. It had broken their military, shattered their government, and crushed their collective identity. And then, when fragmented Valari hive clusters came to human borders asking for shelter, humanity had let them in. Not just let them in, welcomed them, given them homes, built integration programs, provided medical care and education, and jobs, a joint humanary reconciliation Council had been established with representatives from both species, working together to build something new. From the ashes of the old, the galaxy called it madness. The Cures said it was a trick. The military powers of the conquered said it was a trap that humanity was building, a client species to use as soldiers. The Daleth said nothing because the Draith understood humanity had never wanted to destroy the Velari. Humanity had wanted them to learn, and the best way to teach a lesson is not to kill the student, it is to show them a better way and let them choose it for themselves. On the 5th anniversary of the Verdinia attack, Ambassador Kalen Dai stood at the central podium of the Galactic. Conquered, the chamber was full, every seat was taken, hundreds of species watched in person and through quantum link broadcast across the galaxy. Dice looked older than he had 5 years ago. His hair was gray at the temples. There were lines on his face that had not been there before, but his eyes were clear, and his voice was strong. 5 years ago, he said, a species called the Velari fired a weapon at a colony called Verdania 4. That weapon killed 14 children and injured nearly 200 more. What happened after that, the war, the destruction, the fall of the Velari, is known to everyone in this chamber. I'm not here to talk about that. He paused. I am here to talk about what happened next, because what happened next is more important than the war. He told him about Tomas, who walked with a limp but still loved flowers. He told them about Mira and Sarah, who were healthy and happy and argued about whose turn it was to feed the cat. He told them about Director Mubari, who still ran the Learning Center and still knew every child by name. He told them about the Velari clusters who had found new homes in human space, who were learning to think as individuals for the first time, who were building lives that the old Nexian would never have allowed. Humanity is not a warlike species, he said. I know that is a strange thing to say given what you all witnessed 5 years ago, but it is the truth. We are builders, we are explorers, we are teachers and farmers and dreamers. We reach out to the stars with open hands, and we hope always that what we find there will reach back. His voice grew quieter, and the chamber leaned to listen. But we have one rule, one law, that is older than our civilization, older than our language, older than our fire. It is written in our bones and our blood and every cell of our bodies. You do not harm our children. This is not a policy. It is not a strategy. It is not something we decided in a meeting. It is what we are. It is the deepest truth of our species, and every civilization in this galaxy would do well to remember it. He stepped back from the podium. The chamber was silent for a long time. In the gallery above, Sorvan the Drowith elder sat in his chair and watched with his old golden eyes. He thought of an ancient Dali proverb, one that his own elders had taught him 800 years ago, when the galaxy was younger and the stars seemed closer. The beast that guards its young is the beast you do not hunt. He closed his eyes and was satisfied that the galaxy had finally learned this truth. 3 months later, a shuttle docked at the Concord station carrying the first diplomatic team from a newly space-faring species called the Inari. They were small, blue-skinned, witty-eyed, and overwhelmed by the size and noise and chaos of the galactic community. Their lead diplomat, a young woman named Tella, looked around the conquered halls with an expression of pure wonder. She was assigned a guide, an older diplomat from the Seshi species, a four-armed being, named Dren, who had served in the conquered for 30 years, he had been there. For the Verdinia incident, he had watched the human fleet mobilize, he had seen the Villari fall. Tella asked him 1,000 questions about the conquered, about trade, about laws and customs, and which species made the best food. Dren answered them all patiently. Then she asked the question he had been waiting for. What about the humans? She said. We have heard stories about them. Some say they are kind, some say they are terrifying. What is the truth? Dren stopped walking. He turned to face her, and his expression was serious in a way it had not been before. Both, he said, both things are true, and that is what makes them what they are. Be kind to them, trade with them, argue with them if you must. They love a good argument. Share meals with them, tell them jokes, let them teach your children and learn from theirs. He put one of his 4 hands on her shoulder. But whatever you do, he said, across all the stars and all the ages, no matter how strong you become, no matter what disputes you have, no matter what territory you claim or what power you hold. He looked her in the eyes. Never touch their children. Tella stared at him. She saw the weight behind his words, not anger, not fear, but the deep bone-level certainty of someone who had witnessed a truth so fundamental that it could not be argued with. She nodded, and far away on a small green planet at the edge of human space, children ran laughing through the blue grass under a golden sun, and the galaxy turned, and the lesson held